At a seaside lunch, his daughter pointed at a woman in rags. "Daddy, she looks like Mommy." When Elias crossed the street and called out a name buried deep in his past, the answer he got threatened to reopen wounds he never truly healed. She was smiling, her face pressed to the glass even though the sun outside was far too bright to look at. Elias held the menu in one hand and, with the other, tried to quietly wipe off the ketchup Ayla had smeared on her arms, painting herself for some invisible battle. The Venice Beach restaurant buzzed with noise, clattering dishes and overlapping conversations, but at table 2, facing the ocean, there was a brief pause. Or maybe just an attempt at one. Ayla swung her feet in the air, treating the high stool like a playground toy, humming to herself as she poked a bent straw into her golden lemonade. From time to time, Elias glanced around, as if trying to convince himself that life had returned to normal, or was at least pretending well enough. It wasn't until the steaming apple pie arrived that Ayla spoke casually, like someone asking, "The time." "Daddy, that lady looks like Mommy." He didn't respond right away, didn't even turn to look. He knew, instinctively, that he shouldn't. The girl's voice was sweet, calm, untouched by the fractures that the past carves into adults. Elias took a deep breath, fork frozen in the air, then slowly turned, expecting anything but not what he saw. The woman sat on the sidewalk across the street. Her clothes were mismatched layers, sun-faded and worn. Her hair was long, tangled, scorched by sunlight, but it was the way she clutched a crumpled paper bag to her chest, the shape of her chin, the deep, watchful eyes that locked on his before he even had time to react. For a second, Elias forgot to breathe. Sophie's face, his wife's, rushed back to him like a cold wave that burned from the inside. But it wasn't her. It couldn't be. Sophie was gone. He had identified her himself. He had closed the casket himself. "Ayla," he whispered, gently touching his daughter's arm. "Stay here. I'll be right back." She nodded, used to her father's short absences and anxious returns. She kept tracing patterns in the ice of her lemonade with the straw. Elias crossed the street like he was crossing a decade in mere seconds. Each step brought a new question made of raw nerve. The woman now stared at the ground, slowly rocking back and forth, unaware of the storm she was stirring. He stopped about a yard away. His voice came out softer than he expected. "Marina?" She lifted her eyes slowly, not startled, but with something that felt like recognition. She squinted against the sun, blinking several times. The skin around her eyes was lined but unmistakably familiar. Elias felt his stomach flip. "Elias?" His name came out in a forgotten cadence, like a song she hadn't heard in years. He felt the blood drain from his fingers. It was impossible. Marina had disappeared 7 years ago, right after the funeral. No trace. No answers. "My God," he murmured. "Marina, is that really you?" She bit her lower lip, and her eyes welled up almost instantly. "Do you remember me?" she whispered. "Where have you been all this time?" But she didn't answer. She just pulled the bag closer, like whatever was inside it was too fragile to name. Across the street, Ayla kept playing with the bubbles in her lemonade, unaware of the emotional storm unraveling before her father's eyes. The silence between them was thick, like the air before a storm. Elias didn't know if he should kneel, hug her, ask, or run. Marina looked down at the cracked sidewalk, and he noticed she was trembling. Even though the sun was still beating down on the asphalt, she wasn't dirty like other people living on the streets. She was undone, like someone time had forgotten. Her shoes didn't match. A red string hung from her left wrist. Her fingernails were unkempt, but painted a color he vaguely remembered. Moss green, the one she used to wear as a teenager. "Do yous need anything, food, water?" She shook her head. Then, eyes still on the ground, she asked, "Is she your daughter?" The question hit like a cold gust down his spine. It took Elias a few seconds to respond. "Yes, Ayla, 4 years old." Marina smiled, but it was more pain than joy. As if the girl's name had unlocked something inside her she didn't know was still there. "She looks like Sophie," she said, still not looking at him. "The way she holds the cup, The way she watches the world. Elias wanted to ask how she knew that. He wanted to understand where Marina had been all those years, why she hadn't shown up for the funeral, why she disappeared without a word. But something in him, maybe her lowered gaze, maybe the knot in his throat, asked for silence. So instead he sat beside her. Not across. Beside. Like they used to do as teenagers, skipping class and sitting on the school steps, dreaming up futures that never came. Marina reached for the red string around her wrist and twisted it slowly, like it still connected her to something invisible. Her eyes were filled with tears, but none fell. "I thought you had died," he said, voice rough. She closed her eyes like the sentence had physical weight. "In a way, I did." They sat in silence. Cars passed behind them. A dog barked. From the other side of the street. Life kept going, indifferent, while two stories collided without warning. Elias wanted to touch her, but didn't know where or how. Instead, he pulled out his wallet and took a crumpled napkin, still dry. He handed it to her quietly. Marina accepted it with care, like it was something sacred. She didn't wipe her eyes. She just held it, fingers wrapped around it like it was a bridge about to collapse. Across the street, Ayla stood now, eyes scanning the traffic for her father. Elias raised a hand and motioned, "Be right there." She waved back, content. "Why did you leave, Marina?" The question slipped out before he had time to stop it. She took a deep breath, the napkin now crushed in her hand. When she spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. "Because I knew things I couldn't say, and because staying would have destroyed everything." He didn't understand, or didn't want to, but he honored the weight of her words. Sophie, did she know?" Marina hesitated, then nodded slowly, like she was confessing to an old pain. Elias felt his heart stop for a beat. Time didn't seem to know whether to move forward or freeze. The afternoon light began to shift and the breeze changed. Marina reached into the paper bag and carefully pulled out a folded piece of fabric, light blue. Elias recognized it instantly. It was one of Ayla's cloth diapers. Sophie had embroidered her name on it. She laid it gently in her lap without a word. Elias just stared, hands still on his knees. It was the most intimate moment of the entire day. Her holding a piece of the past like it still belonged to the present. Him, frozen, trying to grasp how many lifetimes could fit into one silence. The V. Soft blue cloth sat in Marina's lap like a forgotten relic. Elias didn't know whether to feel relief or dread. It meant Marina had been nearby at some point after Sophie died, maybe too close, and never said a word. "Why do you have this?" She took a long time to answer, touched the cloth with the tip of her finger, like she could still hear Ayla crying through the threads. When she finally spoke, her tone was heavy but calm. "Sophie gave it to me, before everything happened." Elias felt the world shrink. Her words echoed through his chest, reverberating with a near unbearable intensity. "That doesn't make sense, Marina. Sophie died suddenly. She was fine. She knew Elias." Marina didn't raise her voice. There was no drama. She simply let the words fall into the afternoon like a stone, into a perfectly still lake. Elias stood up suddenly, hands pressed to his temples. He took 2 steps away, as if the air around her had turned to fire. She knew what? Marina didn't answer right away. She placed the cloth diaper back into the bag and pulled her knees to her chest, hugging her legs like a child trying to hide from the world. "That the accident wasn't an accident," she murmured. Elias turned to face her. His heart was pounding in his ears. That sentence didn't belong in the world he thought he knew. "What are you saying?" She slowly lifted her face. Her eyes were red, not from crying but from something deeper, like she hadn't slept in weeks, like rest no longer lived inside her. "I can't tell you everything. Not here. Not now. But Sophie came to me. 2 days before it happened, she was scared. Of someone or something." "What kind of something, Marina?" She hesitated. Looked down at the red string around her wrist. "You need to take me somewhere safe." The request hung in the air. Elias looked at her and, for a brief moment, saw the girl he once knew in high school. The same weight in her shoulders, the same careful way of speaking, like every word might break the world. Ayla was running across the street now, arms wide like wings. Elias rushed to catch her before her small feet touched the hot asphalt. She threw her arms around him, laughing, completely unaware of the abyss surrounding them. "Daddy, what took you so long?" He forced a smile, brushing her hair off her forehead. "I ran into a very old friend." Isla looked at Marina, who was now slowly standing up, as if her bones were more tired than the rest of her. When their eyes met, there was a moment of strange silence, not uncomfortable but heavy. Ayla smiled first. "You're the lady who looks like Mommy." Marina smiled back, her lips trembling. Then she crouched down to the girl's level and slowly reached out her hand. "And you look like her too." Elias watched the scene like he was outside of himself, like something was being stitched together despite all the broken threads. Marina touched Ayla's fingers gently, and in that gesture there was something sacred, a goodbye, or maybe a reunion that didn't yet know how to exist. "We can talk somewhere else," Elias said at last. Marina nodded, but before moving, she reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and pulled out an old photograph, creased at the corners, worn by time. She handed it to Elias without a word. It was a picture he had never seen. Sophie, pregnant, one hand. Resting on her belly, Marina beside her holding an open notebook, one word written on the page: fear. Elias stared at the image for what felt like forever. There, in the middle of that faded photo, was a truth with no caption, and a promise that the next steps wouldn't be easy. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that like button. Elias's car moved slowly through the quiet residential streets of Mar Vista. The windows were down, letting in a warm breeze that smelled like freshly cut grass and old afternoons. Ayla slept in the backseat, head tilted, the seatbelt stretched across her small chest. Marina stared out the window motionless, as if anchoring herself to reality through every tree and streetlight. No one spoke. And still the silence said everything. Elias pulled up to the house, a modest lightwood home with a small front yard and a child's bicycle leaning against the gate. He turned off the engine but kept his hands on the wheel longer than necessary. "You still live here?" Marina asked softly. "Since Ayla was born." He stepped out and carefully opened the back door, lifting his daughter into his arms. She mumbled something halfway between sleep and dream, then nestled back into his shoulder. Marina followed her footsteps hesitant, like someone entering sacred ground. Inside, the house smelled of lavender and old paper. Children's drawings covered the walls, books stacked in corners, and the soft glow of a vintage lamp bathed the room in amber light. Elias laid Ayla in bed, gently pulled the blanket over her, and turned off the light, leaving the door slightly ajar. Marina stood, in the hallway, eyes hollow but alert. "Feels like a lifetime since I've seen this," she said. Elias didn't answer. He just walked to the kitchen, got 2 glasses and filled them with water. She followed, dragging her feet on the carpet like each step cost something. They sat at the table, the glasses between them. Their eyes wandered. What was Sophie afraid of, Marina? She traced the rim of her glass with her fingertip, eyes fixed on the water. It wasn't a person. Not exactly, it was a feeling, like she was being watched, like something was coming. But she never told me, ever, and we were everything to each other. Marina let out a short sigh, almost impatient, but held herself back. Sometimes fear isn't something you share, Elias. Sometimes you hide it to protect the ones you love. He looked at her more intensely now. And you? Why didn't you tell me anything? Why did you disappear? Marina rested her elbows on the table and rubbed her face with both hands as if her skin ached. Because I got pulled into it, without meaning to, without even knowing, and by the time I realized, it was already too late. Elias leaned forward. Too late for what? She hesitated, then, slowly, lifted her shirt just enough to reveal the left side of her ribs. An old, poorly healed scar, long and jagged. Elias held his breath. This happened a few days after the funeral. Someone broke into the place I was staying. They didn't take anything. They just left a warning. A warning? She nodded and pulled her shirt back down. I disappeared so I wouldn't become a statistic. But I kept watching. From a distance, and one day I found the diaper. It had fallen by the front steps of your old house. I picked it up. I kept it. Because it was all that was left. Silence returned, heavy as ever. Elias got up, walked to a shelf, and took down a small picture frame. It showed Sophie smiling, cradling newborn Ayla. The photo was matte paper, edges worn. He held it for a moment, then handed it to Marina. She took it with trembling hands, said nothing, but her eyes filled with tears. Do you think she knew she was going to die? Elias's question was barely above a whisper. Marina pressed her lips together like she was chewing on old memories. I think she felt it, but couldn't prove it. And when she tried to speak up, it was already too late. She placed the photo back on the table carefully, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled note. She left me this. Elias took it with steady hands, unfolded it. It was a short sentence, written in familiar blue ink. If something happens to me, don't trust what seems clear. He felt the ground shift beneath him. Inside that single sentence lived an entire new story. Elias held the note for too long. Sophie's words were a whisper through time, slicing through everything he thought he knew. He read them over and over, like somewhere between the lines there was an answer, or a plea. Marina stepped away from the table and walked toward the living room window. She stood still, staring at the empty street under the fading orange light. Lower. Silence between them was starting to hurt more than any word could. Is someone still looking for you? Elias asked, eyes still on the note. She took a while to respond, just tilted her head slightly like she was hearing something outside. I don't know, but the feeling, it never left. Elias joined her at the window. The street was calm, too calm. The kind of quiet that comes right before a storm. If you're right, Marina, and then Sophie was murdered. The word dropped to the floor like a stone. Marina didn't answer. She simply turned to him and nodded, barely. Her eyes were dry, but the pain in them was liquid. Elias clenched. His fists, his entire body reacted. A wave of nausea rose in his gut. Everything he'd built, the accident, the grief, the slow rebuilding with Ayla, suddenly hung in the air, ready to collapse. I can't go through all this again, he said, more to himself than to her. But you already are, Marina replied. She walked over to the bookshelf and picked up a small leather glasses case. She opened it carefully and pulled out an old key. No label. She set it on the table. This belonged to Sophie's locker, at the studio where she worked. Elias stared at the key like it was a relic. He'd never known Sophie had a private locker outside their home. Marina continued. I went there after the funeral. I needed to feel her presence. I saw the locker. It was locked. It took me months to get this key. And what's inside? I don't know. I've never opened it. I waited for you. The words hit deep. Elias felt stuck between two worlds. The father who wanted to keep Ayla away from all this, and the man who needed to know the truth, even if it broke him. Right then, a soft knock at the front door froze them both. A faint sound, like someone brushing against the wood. Elias walked to the door cautiously. When he opened it, no one was there, just a folded piece of paper lying on the porch. He picked it up. It was a grainy printout of an old photo, probably pulled from an outdated social media profile. In the image, Marina and Sophie were laughing together, leaning against a wall covered in graffiti. But what chilled Elias's blood was what was scrawled across the photo in red ink. Some doors should stay closed. He slammed the door, locked it, and pulled the curtains shut. Marina watched him calmly, almost like she'd been expecting it. Who would send this? He asked, his voice trembling. Someone who's still out there. Someone who wants us to stay in the dark. The clock read just after 6. Ayla was still asleep but stirring in her room. Elias felt the overwhelming urge to run to her, to shield her with his body. I have to think about Ayla. I know. That's why we have to do this the right way. Elias looked at Marina, at the key on the table, at the threatening photo in his hand. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a target. a marked spot on a map he no longer knew how to read. He took a deep breath. Facing this might break everything he'd rebuilt. But not facing it meant living under the shadow of a ghost. The key still sat there, catching the soft light from the lamp like an indecent invitation. And deep down, he already knew the answer. The key felt warm in his hand. Elias stood at the door of the old studio where Sophie used to spend her afternoons, saying she needed time with her ideas. It was a low building, sun-bleached with frosted plastic covering the windows. Marina stood beside him, hoodie up, staring at the door like it was an open grave. No one said a word. Silence had become part of the ritual. Elias turned the key. The lock clicked open. They stepped inside. The place smelled of old paint, wood, and something he couldn't name, somewhere between faded perfume and abandonment. The fluorescent lights flickered before coming on. Inside, everything was almost exactly as Sophie had left it. Easels, stiff paintbrushes, dried jars, a stained stool. The locker stood in the corner, metal rusted and now finally unlocked. Elias opened the door slowly. Inside there was a cardboard box, a black notebook, and an envelope with his name on it, Elias, written by hand. His hands trembled as he took the envelope. He sat down right there, leaning against the locker, and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, written in Sophie's unmistakable handwriting. Some of the words were smudged, as if she'd cried while writing. If you're reading this, it means doubt won over silence. I wanted to protect you, Elias, and protect Ayla. But some things don't go away just because we pretend they're not real. He kept reading, though the words were already blurring through his tears. Remember that exhibition I turned down in New York? It wasn't just fear. The invitation came from someone I didn't want to see again. Someone from my past who had threatened to return. I didn't tell you because I thought I could handle it on my own. But then I started feeling shadows. Footsteps behind me. Half-open doors, distant voices. Even Marina noticed. She was the one who warned me. And she was the one who promised to tell you everything if something ever happened to me. Elias lowered the letter. His face was wet with tears. Marina slowly walked over and knelt beside him. She rested a hand lightly on his shoulder. She didn't speak. It wasn't a touch that demanded answers. Just presence. I should have seen it, he whispered. There was no way to know, Elias. He turned to her, eyes burning with pain and rage. She trusted me, and I was so busy trying to be strong, trying to move on. I never saw the signs. Marina shrank slightly. She picked up the black notebook and placed it in his lap. There's more here. Sketches, notes, fragments, maybe clues. Elias opened it randomly. There was a drawing of Ayla sleeping, and beside her a dark, faceless figure watching from a distance. Below it, in handwriting, he's back. The breakdown didn't come as a scream. It came as a collapse from the inside. Elias dropped the notebook and buried his face in his hands, letting out a muffled sound. Marina wrapped her arms around him, gently, without pressure. A quiet embrace, honoring the weight of living grief. They stayed like that for long minutes. Then Elias pulled away and wiped his face with the back of his hand. I can't let this go. Not after all this. Marina nodded, but there was something in her eyes, something unspoken. There's more, isn't there? He asked. She looked down. Silence. Then, she whispered, I lied about something. The air left the room. What? She took a breath. Opened the cardboard box. From inside, she pulled out a cassette tape and a small portable recorder. Sophie asked me to keep this. Said it was only to be given to you, if you made it here. Elias took the tape with shaking hands. Marina pressed play on the recorder. The sound was scratchy, weak. Then a voice came through. Sophie's voice, soft, steady, almost resigned. Elias, if you're hearing this, the curtains have fallen. Maybe you'll hate me, maybe you'll understand. But what I hid wasn't betrayal. It was terror. He closed his eyes. That voice he thought he'd lost forever now filled the room. Every word was both a knife and a hug. Sophie continued, Be careful with those who come close saying they want to protect you. Not everyone is who they seem. The tape cut off there. The recording ended. Elias looked at Marina. For the first time. Their silence wasn't unity. It was suspicion. The recorder was silent, but Sophie's voice still echoed in the room, like it had imprinted itself on the walls. Elias kept his eyes closed for a few seconds. What he felt wasn't just grief. It was something heavier, a guilt he didn't know how to name. Marina was standing now, her back to him, fiddling with one of the paint jars on the workbench. The afternoon light filtered through the frosted windows, catching her hair in a way Elias hadn't seen in years, or maybe had never really noticed. The scent of the studio unlocked buried memories. That woodsy perfume Sophie used to wear when she came back from here, the soft sound of brush bristles on paper, the way she used to hum quietly as she painted. Elias walked over to a stack of canvases and pulled one out. It was an unfinished watercolor, shades of blue and grey, a solitary house beneath a swirling sky. In the lower corner, Sophie's signature, and a date, 2 weeks before she died. "She knew she was leaving," he whispered. Marina turned slowly, watching him in silence. There was tenderness in her eyes, but something else too. Something Elias couldn't quite name. He looked down at the notebook on the floor, then at the tape, then at her. "You still haven't told me everything, Marina." She didn't respond right away. She stepped closer, stopping just a breath away. This time her eyes didn't avoid his. "I was afraid you'd hate me." "For what?" Marina closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her voice was thick, like it had been swallowed 1,000 times before coming out. "Because part of what Sophie was hiding was because of me." Elias didn't understand at first. "What do you mean?" Marina glanced toward the window as if looking to the sky for the right words. "Sophie, she loved me, not just as a friend. Not only that, the sentence didn't come with drama, no scandal. It landed like a quiet truth, too old to be hidden any longer." Elias felt his body react on a delay, not with anger, not even shock, but with a slow unraveling, as if everything he thought he knew was quietly reshaping itself. "And you?" Marina gave a brief, melancholy laugh. "I loved her too, just not in the right way, and not at the right time." The silence between them was now woven with honesty. "She chose you, Elias. She loved you. Truly, I was never a threat, but I was a shadow." He ran a hand through his hair and paced a little before stopping in front of her. "Why did you come back?" "Because I couldn't carry this alone anymore. Because I saw Ayla and realized that there's still something of Sophie alive in this world. Something worth protecting." Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small glass vial with a cork top. She handed it to him. Elias took it, confused. "What is this?" "Her perfume, the original. Sophie had it made by a perfumer. She was the only one who wore it." He uncorked it, and in an instant the scent swallowed him whole. It wasn't just memory. It was presence. It was Sophie behind him, about to touch him. His eyes welled up. Marina stepped back slightly, giving him space, respecting that intimate moment between him and a ghost. Elias closed the vial and held it tightly in his hand, then looked at Marina, and for the first time in a long time, there was no distance between them, only exhaustion, and a fragile thread of trust. "What do we do now?" Marina took a deep breath. "We find out who silenced her, and we protect Ayla together if you'll let me." Elias nodded. Sophie's scent still clung to his fingers. The notebook lay on the floor, the tape sat on the table, and the key now felt like it opened a door inside him too. That night, the house was steeped in a thick silence. Ayla slept with one hand splayed on the pillow, fingers still faintly stained with crayon. Elias watched her from the crack in the doorway, heart torn between a past that wouldn't stop bleeding and a present that was rebuilding itself through small, careful gestures. In the living room, Marina organized Sophie's notes into neat piles, annotations, sketches, snippets of seemingly disconnected phrases. The recorder, now off, remained at the center of the table like a sacred object. Elias walked in slowly and sat beside her. They didn't speak much. Their bond was now made of gestures, of listening without needing words. "She left clues," Marina said, pointing to a sheet with red-circled notes. Elias picked it up. It was a list of dates, some underlined with shaky lines. Beside them, names of places: Wilshire Studio, Orange Booth Cafe, Lighthouse Centre. All familiar. All places Sophie used to go but never talked much about. You think she was being followed? I think so. But more than that, I think she was putting together a bigger puzzle, something that started before she ever met you. The words hit Elias harder than expected. He leaned back in the chair and took a breath. I always thought I knew everything about her, but maybe I only knew what she wanted me to see. Marina nodded slowly. We never really know anyone fully, not even the people we love. For a moment they just sat there, breathing the same air. Elias got up and returned with a box of tea, offered her some. Marina chose chamomile. He did too. It was a small gesture, but it carried the attempt to reclaim some kind of peace. As the water heated, he looked over at her. Do you have somewhere to go? She shook her head without shame. All I have now is this, the truth and Ayla. The honesty hit him in an unexpected way. He poured the tea, sat back down, and stared into his mug like it was an amulet. You can stay here, he said, not looking directly at her. Not the couch, the guest room, until this is over. Marina looked at him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, but she didn't question it. She just nodded. Thank you. They drank in silence. And, little by little, the notebooks and papers began to feel less foreign, as if they were reading a story of someone still breathing through the pages. The name Lighthouse Centre rings a bell, Marina said, pulling a sheet from the middle of the pile. I think I saw something about it years ago. An artistic retreat place, but it always felt strange. Strange how? Strange like controlled, restricted, like something was hidden behind the surface. Elias grabbed his laptop and started searching. Marina got up and walked to the shelf where Sophie kept her favorite books. She pulled one, then another, until she found a leather-bound notebook tucked between them. Inside, more drawings. One stood out. The interior of a house with narrow windows, an iron bed, and a camera in the ceiling. In the bottom corner of the page, a single word. Watched. They calm looked at each other. That place, Elias murmured. She was there, and maybe she saw something she wasn't supposed to. Marina ran her fingers over the page. Her eyes locked onto a point beyond the paper. I'm coming with you. He didn't argue. He just nodded. It was the first time since their reunion that fear didn't live between them. Only a silent, irreversible decision. The Lighthouse Centre was an hour and a half outside Los Angeles, tucked between dry hills and narrowing roads that climbed higher with every turn. Elias drove with white knuckles and clenched jaw. Marina, in the passenger seat, flipped through Sophie's leather notebook as if decoding secret messages hidden between the lines. The road ended at a rusted gate, flanked by a low stone wall. A faded sign read, in what looked like hand-painted letters, Lighthouse Centre, Silent Retreats and Self-Discovery. Silence, an irony too sharp to ignore. Are we sure about this? Elias murmured, cutting the engine. Marina nodded, fingers gripping Sophie's perfume bottle in her coat pocket like an invisible shield. They got out. The heat was dry, and the wind carried a smell of dirt and scorched eucalyptus. As they approached the main building, dark wood, narrow windows, they were greeted by a middle-aged man with neutral features and a faint smile. Welcome, he said. Are you here for the retreat? We're looking for information about an artist, Marina said before Elias could speak. Sophie Breen, she was here a few years ago. The man didn't respond right away. He tilted his head slightly. The name doesn't ring a bell, but I can check the older records. Please wait a moment. He disappeared through a side door, and Elias felt his chest tighten. Something about the place felt off, heavy, like the air itself carried weight. This place smells like secrets, he whispered. Marina nodded. Her eyes scanned every detail, the architecture, the unusually high windows, the barely noticeable security cameras. The man returned with a calm expression, but his eyes were slightly tenser now. We don't have anyone by that name in Our records. Perhaps you're thinking of a different location. We're not mistaken, Ilias replied firmly. Is there anything else I can help you with? Ilias took a step closer. Can I use the restroom? The man hesitated, then pointed down a hallway. Second door on the right. Ilias entered the hallway but walked past the restroom. He tried one door, locked, then another. The third opened into a small room lined with old lockers and faded labels. He started searching through them, hoping to find anything that might link Sophie to this place. Suddenly he felt someone behind him. He turned. Marina was there. Reception's distracted. I had a feeling. Come with me. She led him to a side staircase hidden behind a wooden partition. They descended quietly into a dimly lit basement. The air was thick and warm. At the end of the corridor, a partially open door emitted a low, constant hum. They pushed it open, slowly. Inside was a room lined with files, boxes, and surveillance monitors. Ilias froze as he saw one of the monitors showing old footage, a woman painting alone. The video was grainy, but the face was unmistakable. Sophie, he whispered. Marina swallowed hard and began opening drawers frantically. She found a binder. Inside, a file labeled with Sophie's full name, printed photos, behavioral reports, check-in and check-out dates, and a chilling note. Patient did not authorize recording. Footage obtained without consent. She wasn't here by choice, Marina said, her voice breaking. Ilias flipped through the documents, his hands shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. This place? It's a clinic disguised as a retreat. It's a prison. They heard footsteps, doors closing. Tension prickled their skin. Marina shoved the file under her coat and grabbed Ilias by the arm. We need to leave. Now. They climbed the stairs carefully. The receptionist was now speaking on the phone, his back turned. Marina slipped out like a shadow. Ilias followed. They were halfway to the car when a voice called after them. You forgot to sign the guest book. Ilias turned just enough to speak. Thank you. We prefer to keep the silence. They got into the car. Marina clutched the file to her chest. Ilias started the engine and peeled out too fast, kicking up dust. In the rearview mirror, the man watched them. His smile was gone. Marina opened the file in her lap. Tucked between the papers was a loose sheet, a letter with no signature. But the handwriting used was Sophie's. If you found this, it means I survived through you. Go all the way. In that moment, Ilias knew. They weren't just uncovering the truth. They were being tested. Sunday morning arrived with a clear sky and a gentle breeze weaving between the palm trees like an old whisper. Ilias walked along the boardwalk holding Ayla's small hand. The same beachfront restaurant was still there, frozen in time. But something in his stride had shifted. Less urgency, more presence. Ayla watched the dogs chase each other on the sand, laughter glowing in her eyes. The sun touched her skin with kindness, and for the first time in a long time, Ilias realized he was breathing without resistance. Can we sit there, Daddy? She pointed to the wooden bench across from the sidewalk, the same place where days earlier everything had turned upside down. Of course, sweetheart. They sat together. Ayla leaned her head against his shoulder and stayed there, quiet. Ilias closed his eyes. The sound of the waves merged with memories of Sophie's voice on the tape, her final letter, the confidential file, now safely in die. The hands of a trusted lawyer, far from the wrong eyes. Marina appeared minutes later, walking from the opposite side of the street. She carried a paper bag with coffee and pastries. She wore one of Ilias's old baseball caps, and for the first time in years there was rest in her eyes. I brought us reconciliation coffee, she said, offering the bag. Ayla clapped softly. Yay! Is there cake? Yes. Apple. Your favorite. As they ate, Ilias noticed Marina's hands. They trembled less now. There was steadiness in her movements, a quiet kind of relief. Between the three of them, something new was beginning to form. Not a replacement, a mending. A reconstruction built from loss, but also from choice. After breakfast, Marina pulled a small red notebook from her pocket. It's Sophie's too. I found it tucked in the folder. Looks like a kind of journal, but she wrote it as if she were speaking to Ayla in the future. Elias opened it to the first page and read aloud, his voice low. "If one day you ask about me, my little light, tell your heart I never really left. I'm where the wind touches your face, and where your father closes his eyes to remember you." Ayla watched him, quietly absorbing the tone of his voice, even if she didn't understand every word. But that tone was enough. It reached her. Elias closed the notebook carefully and handed it to her. "This is a gift from Mommy." The little girl hugged the diary to her chest, as if she knew it held something sacred. "Can I draw in it?" "Of course, my love, she'd love that." Time seemed to slow down. The world paused, softened around them. Marina looked at Elias with silent gratitude. He returned a small smile, not of joy, but of acknowledgement. "What happens now?" she asked. "We live," he said, slowly, without erasing anything. "No more hiding." She nodded. Then, as if remembering something precious, pulled out the vial of perfume. She opened it, and with a delicate touch, dabbed a drop onto Ayla's wrist. "That way she stays close to you," Marina whispered. Ayla sniffed and beamed. "It smells like Mommy's pillow." Elias lowered his gaze, tears rising. And for the first time since the loss, he allowed himself to cry in front of his daughter. Not from despair, but from release. Marina placed her hand over his. She said nothing. She didn't need to. It was a silent gesture. A complete one. Ayla stood up, ran to the sidewalk and began drawing in the dirt with a stick. A sun, a house, 3 people holding hands. Elias watched her. She smiled as she drew, fingers dusty with sand. Now, there was light. "Thank you for coming this far. But don't leave just yet. On the screen next to you is another powerful story waiting to be told. Click, subscribe, and share. I'll see you there. There.